It looks like we're going to have to go back to the drawing board, Austin. I've noticed that we've had many difficulties in our processes, some hiccups in our supply chain. The calculations, when we run it across a longer span of things, isn't really adding up. There's a couple worrisome points that we discovered in our conversation with a certain individual. And they were pointed out and discussed it in depth. And we were able to understand that the current way we were approaching this endeavor was bound to fail. What does it mean to go back to the drawing board?
So I want to start with the phrase going back to the drawing board, because when you hear that, one of the main words that sticks out is the word back. When you hear that, people assume, hey, I'm reverting, I'm regressing, I'm getting worse, I'm not improving. However, going back to the drawing board could be the catalyst to your improvement. It could be the spark that gets you heading in the right direction. And in my opinion, doing that is not a sign of failure or a sign that you're regressing. It's a sign that you're aware. Being cognizant of the fact that you are encountering things that aren't trending you in the right direction, aren't necessarily getting you to the place that you want to get to, that takes a lot of humility and awareness to be able to come to that conclusion and then do it. Because a lot of people might see that they need to improve, but rarely do people actually go back to the drawing board to say, hey, I have to improve. Here's what I need to do in order to do it.
Why?
Most of the time, I would say it's a ego thing. Ego is the enemy. Author
Ryan Holiday.
There you go. Ego is the enemy, and we've discussed this multiple times. But in this particular case, it's the enemy for a lot of people because they can't say, hey, I'm doing something wrong and I need to do better. And it takes a lot of humility to say that, because you're you. Let's be honest. You're you. Jose is Jose. I'm me. Like, we all think, most of us would like to think pretty highly of ourselves, or if not highly, we just think that we're, pretty good people. So when something challenges that from, our reality, it's hard to deal with that. And it's hard to come to grips with the fact that you're not doing enough and you're the cause. Things aren't going how you want them to go, and you're the cause. It's hard, very hard, to come to grips with that and realize that, and then to sacrifice time, sleep, all that stuff, the brain power, the bandwidth, in order to come up with an actual response and solution that would actually get you somewhere. So I want you to talk about this because we touched on it. Well, I touched on it a little bit, but you have here that the drawing board is where it all began. So can you go into this a little bit more when you're talking about the drawing board is where it all began, and tell people why that's important?
And it's funny. I was just looking up the local cigar lounge because I wanted to pick up some cigars and smoke them. Well, cigarrillos. And I think they need to go back to the drawing board because they close on Sundays at 6 p.m.
Not smart, right?
But Friday and Saturday, they're open till 10 p.m. Whatever. That's why
Geniuses, right?
That's why we'll run them out of business anyways. Your question was
basically how going back to the drawing board is where it all began. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes. So a drawing board is essentially brainstorming. And when you brainstorm, that's when you come up with your best ideas. That's when you're your most creative. That's when you're not really putting the numbers into play. You're just evaluating, hey, is this idea something that we can go through? Hey, how do we make this product happen? Can we make it happen? What are the expenses going to look like? What's our distribution look like? Does it sound good? Can we market it? Can we get it into the proper venues so that we can sell it? And can we profit off of it? On a whiteboard or a drawing board, that's when you're your most creative. And that's where most things began. So it's not a bad thing that you're going back. And you actually should not be afraid of the process of going back to the drawing board. Because if it began from the drawing board, it can continue on the drawing board. A lot of times you can get bogged down in the logistics, and you can dumb down your creativity and your ability to adapt when you're looking at raw numbers. But if you take a step back and you allow yourself to channel that creative energy and evaluate something, you can usually come up with a pretty good solution. Because once you start looking at a ledger or any document that is discussing numbers, logistics, prices, fees, taxes, expenses, you can quickly lose your sense of creativity and you become very numerical and methodical, which there is a time and a place for. But oftentimes, when that fails on paper, you need to go back to the drawing board. It doesn't mean that you can just throw away the plan and say, oh, it's not going to happen, it's impossible. No, you need to find a way. Finding a way is not for everybody. If you don't want to go through the struggle, then don't do it. But don't complain about it and say, this is hard, because naturally, anything of value is going to kick your ass. And you have to go back to the drawing board, turn around, and kick its ass in return. There's only two reasons why you're afraid to go to the drawing board. Either you're excessively arrogant and you think that you don't need to go back to the drawing board because you are Mr. fucking know-it-all, or you're just stupid and you don't even acknowledge the fact you're unaware that you need to go back to the drawing board.
And I might want to add a third one there. You might be scared as well, because you going back to the drawing board probably means that you have to do more work.
Well, see, if you're watching this podcast, I know you're not a pussy, so I didn't say that. But yes, Austin, you have a great point.
I mean, yeah, I feel like, though, there are a set of people, and I hope that you're not, that person watching, but there's people out there that will watch videos like this all the time and almost get off on watching videos like this.
As if they accomplished something just by watching it.
The mental, stimulation for it, that brief amount of time gets them going, and then the next day the shit's gone, and then they don't do shit about it.
We call that mental masturbation.
There you go. And I feel like there's a lot of people, even if you do watch our content, and again, we hope that you're not one of those, people, but a lot of people do that. But I want to go back to the drawing board and touch on when I think people should realize that they have to go back to the drawing board. So I think that there's various signals that you should go back to the drawing board, and we can start with this. So in my opinion, if you are experiencing continuous failed or inconsistent iterations, it's probably time for you to go back to the drawing board. It's like you've seen that person in your town or in your city or somebody that you went to high school with that tried music, right? They tried music and they're basically putting out the same fucking product over and over and over again, and shit's not getting any better, and they think that they're just the hottest thing since fucking sliced bread. Shit's not fucking working. And after a certain point in time, you probably should say, hey, I probably should try to do something else, or I should probably try to, evaluate what I'm doing and try to optimize certain things or tweak certain things, because what I'm doing currently isn't working. So if you have continuous failed attempts, or you're inconsistent with your attempts, you might be 5 for 10. Okay, that's cool and all, but 5 for 10 most of the time is not going to get you to where you want to get to. Mm-hmm. You have to increase that shooting percentage. So if you're inconsistent with your shooting percentage or with your shooting, you need to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I'm doing okay, but how can I get better? And then the next one I would say is a decrease in productivity. And if you are starting to do very well, or you are doing very well currently, and then all of a sudden you experience a decrease in productivity, you have to go back to the drawing board and you have to decide what point in time you have to go do that and identify the stop loss point for you. But you have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I'm trending downward all of a sudden. Why the fuck is this happening? How can I stop it? How can I go back upward? So you have to figure that out. The next one, I would say, if your plan on the drawing board leads to confusion. So if you have a plan or, an idea and people are confused about the idea, it's probably time for you to go back to the drawing board, because if people don't understand it, or certain people that you trust who are experienced, not, of course, I don't want to say peons, but peons are not going to fucking understand it. Piglets are not going to understand, the shit, because they just can't wrap their minds around it. But if people who are actually educated and know what they're talking about don't understand what you're trying to do and don't understand how you're trying to do it, you probably have to go back to the drawing board to make sure everything makes sense. And then lastly, if new variables are brought into the equation. So if you're in a business sphere and you have the thing on lock, right? But then out of nowhere, a new company comes along and they start to innovate shit. They start to do crazy shit like fucking Amazon or some shit. And then it changes, or they could change how the entire market is going, because they're just doing things in such a creative and innovative way. It's probably time for you to go back to the drawing board, because now that there's a new player in town and they do things differently and it works and they're starting to get more traction because people like the way that they're doing things, you might have to adjust how you're doing things in order to keep up or to keep with the trend. Because if you stay with that kind of similar mindset that you have, it could lead you to your demise if you don't quickly optimize and go back to the drawing board and see, hey, how can I improve? Or what are the things that I'm good at and what are the things that they're good at, and how can I incorporate that into what I'm doing? So if you're looking at when to go back to the drawing board, those 4 things, I believe, are telltale signs that you should probably go back to the drawing board. Do you disagree with any of them or agree with them?
I'm trying to think that a good thing to do is actually to go back, to set a schedule to go back to the drawing board every now and then. Any company of any size, well, not any company of any size, a company that's well established and operates in a very competitive market requires a constant drawing board session. There's a reason why in the entrepreneurial operating system, which y'all haven't heard in a while, the EOS, there's a reason why the author structures a company with a visionary and then an implementer. And the reason being is the visionary is the driving force behind the entire company. Without a vision long term and an ever adapting and changing vision, the company itself will essentially fall into a rut. And then, as the saying goes, if you're not moving forward, you're regressing. So Steve Jobs is a perfect example. He was a huge, huge, huge visionary. Tim Cook was the implementer. Tim Cook would make his ideas into a reality. But Steve Jobs, was the one who would plan and see things. He would say, hey, I want this device. I want it like this. Make the font like this. Many of y'all may not know, but almost all the fonts that we use today are because of Apple. Apple, Steve Jobs, revolutionized the font industry, essentially created fonts. And that's all vision. That's all to say that the companies don't evolve and don't adapt without a vision. Other examples, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, any person, and they don't necessarily just have to be in a high position, but it's an individual who has that free form creative thinking, which allows the company to continue adapting and changing and start new novel trends and also move forward. Because a lot of times you can fall into a period of stagnation. And if you're afraid of going back to the drawing board because you see it as a failure, you're sorely mistaken, because it's actually one of the strongest potentials that you have, not only to consolidate and fix the current problem that you have, but to change your projection and trajectory of your company, your business, what have you, including your life, in any way, shape, or form. And I'll give you a real life example. Imagine you're going to the gym and you hit a plateau. You're not increasing muscle mass. your strength isn't going up, you're putting on a little bit of body fat, but you're doing what has always worked for you. Now, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different outcomes. So you literally have to go back to the drawing board and start tweaking minor details. And then you realize, hey, I moved last month, and that's when everything started going downhill. Maybe I'm not sleeping well enough. Then you evaluate your sleep. Maybe I should switch this routine up. Maybe there's X, Y, Z that I could improve. Or even better, you're a power lifter and your lifts start stagnating. Well, you go back to the drawing board, but generally you consult a coach. And I think that, unless you have something to say, that could be a good segue into what you're thinking.
You're good. You're good. And having a coach in that case provided you with another set of eyes for you to be a little bit more cognizant of everything that's happening that you may not even realize. Because sometimes when you're so deep in the weeds and you're thinking about something consistently, you're laser focused on, a few variables and whatnot. However, there could be some over here or over there that you may not be able to see or that you're not thinking about that someone else can point out to you, and then that can help you increase in your productivity. So getting multiple eyes on your plan and on what you're doing is very, very useful, and which is why we've talked about it before, which I believe is very, very important to your maturation in anything, is having someone that you can go through shit with that is not like you, in the sense of they think differently and the way they would go about doing things would be different. Not saying that they clash per se, but just different ways of doing something, because it offers you a different perspective on how things can get done. And having multiple eyes on your plan helps you critique it and hone it to where you come up with an even better plan than what you originally expected or originally produced. And to me, you can't just have anybody, because let's be honest here, unless you're just the intern of the fucking century, insert CEO here. Tim Cook is not about to have an intern in a executive meeting discussing how a company should grow in the next 5 years and what are some innovative things that we should implement in order for the company to grow to where it does so in a manageable and also lucrative way. They're probably not going to ask an intern that. So you have to keep in mind who you're consulting, because sometimes if you consult the wrong person, it could waste time. It could, you could implement an idea that wasn't that great because it wasn't coming from someone who was knowledgeable on the specific field or product that you're into. And, just having the wrong person there could also stagnate creativity because they could be, risk adverse when it comes to certain things. So you have to have somebody who understands that, in order to grow, sometimes you have to take certain risks and whatnot. So having the right group around you that you can trust, and people that are willing to say, hey, Austin, your idea fucking sucks.
Trash.
Horrible. Now, most of the time, for most of you softies, you'd be like, oh my gosh, why would you say that? That's so mean. I'm not feeling that. But once you get to a certain point, especially when it comes to increasing your wealth and increasing your productivity as a human being, entrepreneur, all that shit, you're going to have people around you that are willing to tell you you're doing shit at your whatever you're doing, shit job at whatever, and you need to improve. And having those people around you lets you know you're doing bad, but it also lets you know that you're doing good, or if you're on the right track. Because we know a person, Jose knows them very, very well, that it takes a lot for them to say that you're doing something good or you've done a good job. So if they finally say that, or whenever they finally say that, you probably know that you're on to something very good, because they're not easily swayed in one direction or another. So having a person like that around you is very, very beneficial. Someone who can't be easily impressed, or someone who can't be easily, swayed one way or another, so that they'll just let you do whatever the fuck you want to do and then damn near crash yourself into a fiery abyss.
You need a forever skeptic in your life.
Oh, yes. Great way to put it.
The AM Club Podcast.
Signing out.
Mic check.
The AM Club Podcast.